Dogman Stories.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this edition of Dogman Stories, episode 13, part 1. Now tonight I'm going to do a little bit of different episode. This episode is not exactly a Dogman story, not on part 1 anyway, but there will be a Dogman story eventually throughout this show. Now also tune in next week for our first ever phone call interview, and you do not want to miss this. This is multiple encounters of Dogman. The poor woman can't even walk out her door without having an encounter. So, without further ado, let's get ready for Kate's demon encounter called the Dover Demon. When I was a kid, I lived near a small settlement of modern Nova Scotia. It was located right on the Bay of Fundy. The area has a cross built in memory of the French people who escaped the Arcadian explosion in 1755. Approximately 70 Acadians with aid from the local natives fled from British soldiers up the mountain and hid for a winter on the shoreline of the Bay of Fundy. They didn't want to face being deported and possibly being split up from their families, so many of the Arcadian people died during the winter. They buried their dead and built a cross in memory of their loved ones before the natives took them by canoe across the bay to New Brunswick. To this day, there is a cross that marks the graves of those long forgotten people. The Bay of Fundy is known for having the highest vertical tides in the world. During the 12.5-hour tidal period, approximately 115 billion tons of water flows in and out of the bay. A man by the name of Simon Perkins wrote this in his diary dated October 12, 1796, that he and others had seen 15 different orbs of light hovering and flying over the bay. This has led many to believe that UFOs have frequently visited the area for hundreds of years. I and others believe UFOs come because they use the bay as a natural energy source. I'm not going to go on about alien life or UFOs or any of the other paranormal happenings in that area associated with the bay. I just wanted to give you a feel for the area. I'm going to tell you about the creature that me and two of my friends seen. It's been at least 8 years since the last time I talked to any of my friends. It's funny how time will distance even the closest of friends. It's something that has always haunted me, and I figured if I talked about it, perhaps someone else that may have witnessed this creature near the shorelines might not think they are the only ones. Most people here in Nova Scotia are too reserved to talk about such things. There are too many small-time authors and businesses always trying to make the latest tourist attraction. Any little ghost story or paranormal story is exploited to the max around here. Perhaps it will make them feel less crazy if they know that they are not alone for those who have seen the creature before. At least, I hope I'm not alone. I feel like I'm crazy sometimes. I was lucky that I had a few friends with me to validate my experience. If I would have seen it alone, I would have lost my mind. As soon as it happened, I told my brothers and sisters who believed me. Thank goodness they believed me. Not many family members would believe such a story. They were also able to verify my sighting through two of my friends. The older people who we told about the sighting assumed we saw a lynx or a bobcat due to the monster glowing yellow eyes. I'm a firm believer in cryptids. I believe these creatures are so fast and cunning that they can hide in plain sight. I don't know if they're just creatures who have always been here or if they came from someplace else. All I know is that they are here and they aren't to be trusted. The one I seen radiated pure evil from it. It made me feel fear that I've never felt before, nor have I felt since, nor do I think I'll ever feel again, unless, of course, I cross paths with it again. The fear I felt while in the presence of the creature was very unnatural. At the time, I had only ever heard of Bigfoot. That was because of Hollywood movies and TV shows. I just assumed it was something made up to sell movie tickets or books, not an actual living or breathing creature. When I was a kid and in school, I thought to myself, what in the world is going on around here? So during the summer, I was out, and luckily my only rule for the summer was to be home before dark. My mother never asked any questions just as long as I was out of her hair for the day. My friend Sean came from a similar home, and so did my friend Carissa. We all had to put up with abuse and alcohol in our homes. So for us to be able to spend the day together was a real treat. We lived like 45 minutes away from the bay, riding a bike. We knew the tide like the back of our hand. We lived several miles apart, so it would take us a good hour or two to meet up. We had decided the day before that we would go trout fishing. There was a river out back of Sean's that we could follow all the way to the bay. We knew it would be an all-day adventure, so we set our alarms for 6:30 a.m., and I packed a frozen 2-liter pop bottle with water and a few granola bars to share with my friends. We would all do this so when we decided to stop for lunch, we'd have a good little lunch. By the time I left the house, it was 7:30. I didn't want to leave till I got a hold of my friends to make sure they were still able to go. My friend Sean was notorious for sleeping past our agreed time. He tried calling Carissa to see if she was still coming, but did not get an answer. I lived the furthest away from the bay, so I decided to start walking. I figured by the time I got to Sean's, he would be able to get a hold of Carissa. I wanted her to come, but she had never gone, as far as Sean and I had. Also, all the times I stayed the night at her place, she would sleep in till noon. I assumed she wouldn't even get out of bed. By the time I got to Sean's, to my surprise, he was able to get a hold of Carissa. She had begun walking, and we had to go meet her. Once we all met up, all three of us were together, we went back to Sean's house. I checked the time, and it was almost 10 o'clock. We had to hurry if we planned on getting to the shore while the tide was all the way out. When the tide went out to the shoreline, it grew by miles. We would scavenge for amethyst and whatever else we could find. The field behind Sean's led all the way down there. We had a 15-mile walk through the forest before we got to the steep river cut bank. We had at least 30-foot bank to go down. As we descended down the bank, we clung to the trees and branches to keep us from falling. Sean and I had done this many times, but Carissa had never. We had helped her, and it took twice as long getting down. Once we got down to the bottom, we rested. We sat talking and enjoying ourselves. It was a beautiful summer day. The sun was shining at its brightest. The trees that surrounded us shielded us from the heat. We began getting out our rods and baiting them. We fished our way down the river, exploring as we went along. We hadn't realized how long it was taking us, and soon we realized we wouldn't never make it to the shore before the tide was in again. We had planned to make it to the shore while the tide was still out so we could walk the ocean floor and go up the steps that led up the ocean cliff. Sean and I had done this a few times, and we always made it on time and had a lot of fun doing it. We hadn't realized that Carissa wasn't used to such strenuous activity. She wanted to take lots of breaks and wasn't pleased about the tough terrain. So I decided it was fine and we didn't have to go. Even after we decided not to go all the way, we still weren't making the best time. Once we were hungry, we washed our hands in the river and sat down for our picnic. As I was sitting there, I began to notice the sun shifted in the sky. We were having such a fun time talking and enjoying the beautiful scenery, we hadn't been keeping track of time. I decided it was time to turn around and begin our hike towards home. As I went along, I noticed the sun was beginning to set. That's when I began to get scared. I didn't want to get stuck out in the woods in the dark. We didn't have any flashlights to help guide our way back. My friend Sean was a bit of a dilly-dally. He really didn't want to go home. I don't blame him, because his dad had been home drinking when I had arrived there early that morning. If his dad wasn't passed out drunk by the time he got home, that meant Sean was in for a bad time. I told Sean that I don't want to go home, that I just wanted to get out of the woods before it got dark. So he finally picked up the pace. For some reason, I kept sensing something wasn't right. It was like a feeling of dread had set in. It was something I had never felt in any other times we had explored the woods. We began walking pretty quickly. We knew we had a little less than an hour's walk before we could hike up the river to walk out of the woods through the field out back of Sean's house. I asked if they sensed what I sensed. Sean said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Something doesn't seem right. It's like we're being watched." Sean, of course, said I was nuts. Carissa told me not to scare her. We continued our way along the riverbank. Sean was teasing me about sensing things. He was making jokes about the Blair Witch Project. It was a movie that had recently came out. I hadn't seen it because people told me it was dumb, but apparently it didn't matter. I asked them to be quiet, and then I asked them if they had heard a twig snap. They hadn't heard a twig snap. That's when I noticed the forest was dead silent. I knew forest life did that when there was a predator around. Sean assured me it was nothing. That's when I heard a louder snap from the treetops. Then I heard a loud rustling sound. It sounded like something had just moved quickly through the trees. Carissa asked, "What was that?" She was scared by now. She had somehow heard that time. She had come behind Sean and held his back for protection. I was expecting a lynx or some kind of wildcat. I had no clue in my mind what it might be, or that it might be far worse. I took a step closer to Carissa and Sean. I began peering through the trees, trying to get a look at what was causing the noise. And that's when I spotted it.